Hi, Greg.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I cannot complain. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is the Wright Show, available on both streaming video and audio podcast. You are Greg Gutfeld, famous Fox News personality.
Right.
Is this accurate so far?
So far, I agree 100%. Especially
with the famous?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about, among other things, this book of yours, the Gutfeld Monologues, classic rants from the Five. The Five being the Fox News show that catapulted you to universal celebrity. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. Although I had a show before that late at night called Red Eye, which you probably never heard of.
Well, and you still have another show you should plug, as long as we're plugging your stuff.
Yeah, the Greg Gutfeld Show, which is doing great. That's at Saturdays at 10. It usually wins every Saturday. It's pretty good, and it's fun. You'd like it.
It beats everybody. You beat everybody on Saturday.
I would boast that I get the winning demo at night on cable news. Yeah,
you would.
Sometimes I get beat, but it's a good boast.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a fact checker. You'll be happy to hear we do not have a fact checker. Something we have in common with Fox News.
Well, in that case, it's the
Just
number one
Greg.
show. I believe it's the number one show.
Speaking of my subtle jabs at Fox News, one of our missions here today will be to heal America's tribal divide by demonstrating amity, comity, and all other words that end like that. So, the book, congratulations.
Thank you.
I just went to Amazon to check it out, and you know what I noticed? First of all, it's still selling very well, even though I'm a little late to the party. This has been out for more weeks than I care to admit. My bad. But also, you know what your average review is? You know how many stars you do? I know you do. You've checked, right?
Of course, you have to check. Anybody who doesn't check is lying, because that's when the book's out for the first couple of weeks, you're obsessive and you're constantly looking at it, which is unhealthy. But I think it's around 5 stars.
Around 5 stars. You know damn well what it is. You checked within the last 20 minutes. It is 5 stars. And that's kind of amazing because, like, I've written books. I've never had average of 5 stars. I'm like hoping for 4.5, sometimes have to settle for 4. And you know what that tells me, the 5-star thing? It tells me 2 things, Greg. One is literary masterpiece. And for those of you in audio podcast, I'm holding up the book, The Gutfeld Monologues, Classic Rants from the Five. The other thing is, like, you have actual fans. You have serious fans, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is, it goes back to kind of what you said about healing. If you like Fox News, you know who I am. If you hate Fox News, you probably don't know who I am. So the ratings reflect that. They reflect that if you can't stand Fox, you're not even going to go to that book, so you're not going to go and leave a terrible review. But if you watch Fox, chances are you like me and you will give a good review. So maybe I'm humbly suggesting it has to deal with the separate streams. And a lot of people are in this stream, and a lot of people are in this stream, and they aren't crossing. Did I lose you?
Yeah. That is humble of you to suggest that. And you know, that reminds me, like, maybe I am now hoping to introduce you to, you know, a more liberal audience. Not that my audience is not diverse. It's quite diverse, and I take heat from the right. But maybe we can lower your rating on Amazon if this works as I plan.
That would be great. I'm the only person who'd be willing to be okay with that. If it means healing the divide, I'll take the hit.
Yeah. So I am gonna, you know, by the end of this, I will have subjected you to brutal interrogation about some of the things you say in the book, with which I disagree. But I think we should start on kind of a kinder, gentler note by asking you about your past. I think I can infer with complete confidence by both watching you on TV and reading the book that you were the class clown, right, in school?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that was what I was voted.
You were actually, yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, basically what I do on the Five, and I think I even mentioned it before, is basically sitting in homeroom making jokes and not taking anything seriously and being sarcastic. And 35, 40 years later, that's my job, which is pretty amazing, I think.
It's not a bad job.
No, it's not.
I would take that. So you were like, I can imagine you were worse than just being the class clown. You were probably beloved by teachers. Like, you were disruptive, but they still couldn't help but like you. Is that right?
Yes, until I would go too far. But it's true. It's because, well, you know what? Part of the reason why I guess I was a clown was because I got my work done. So if I would get all my work done, and then I would make it hard for everybody else. Yeah, so the teacher understood that I was on the ball, but was just like, can you just let other people finish their work?
Okay. And this persisted throughout your...
I believe so. Yeah. I don't think I've changed much.
And how did Barry Bonds take all this?
Barry Bonds used to sit behind me.
I know.
He was a year older than me. But in language classes, you could have a mix of ages, and it was Spanish. And he used to kick my chair. He was he was this side to me, and so I'd have, like, if this was the quiz, the Spanish quiz, which would have I would just have to move mine over just a little bit so he could take a look at it. It wasn't a regular thing, but it was enough that I remember it.
And then did he help you with your swing or anything in return?
No, not at all. I don't think we ever exchanged words. Even when he was doing that, I don't think we ever talked.
He would just say, "Show me your answers," or...
Yes. And the thing is, when you think about investment, there's really no, I'm not losing anything on that, right? It doesn't really matter so I just moved the paper over. It's not like I'm losing anything. So unless the teacher grades on a curve. That was always the way I thought about it in high school. Well, you're right, but you know what? It was one guy. You know, how much is that going to matter? And you know what? And you know what? If it got him to leave me alone in the hallway, you know, you never know with jocks and little guys like me. You know. Yeah. I can see the logic. That's compelling. So so at this point in your comedy career, back when you were in school. You were not particularly ideological? I don't think so. I went to Sarah High School, and they were Catholic. Was it Jesuit? I guess I should know this. Jesuit Catholics. They were more into the really liberal. The people who were political there were into the stuff in Central America. It was like during the time of Daniel Ortega. Yep. And I took part in that stuff. We put out a paper about called The Journal, I think, about what was going on in the Central American politics. So imagine being in high school in San Mateo and doing that. But that was a thing. I also collected signatures for the nuclear freeze, which was a thing, I guess in 81 or 82. And it was I think it was Alan Cranston was behind it, and it was like a petition not to allow nuclear arms being transported. So I did that, but I did that not for ideological reasons. I did it for extra credit, which shows you that there was something wrong with it's not a fair way to do things in school, to award extra credit for a political action. But as a student, you don't care. You just want to get that B plus up to an A minus. And I think it was like a half a grade that I got out of it. I just stood in front of I guess it was St. Gregory's Church for one afternoon and just got signatures for this thing I probably didn't know anything about. Okay. So at this point, you're not like particularly conservative or something. And then when did things start to go awry, Greg? When did... You know what happened? I would consider myself a really good liberal reacting to, in high school, I was into punk rock. So I loved the Clash. I mean, the Clash was, I had posters of them everywhere. I worshiped them. Probably 50% of the lyrics I didn't get, but the other 50, I understood it was radical, and the radical was good. But when I got to Berkeley, I think I saw the real deal. And I would say this is true among the right and the left, was that what scared me was groups. Just not beliefs as much, but just groups. And when I saw groups and how scary groups are, just in general, that made me think like I should start stepping away from groups. And a friend of mine was reading the American Spectator and National Review. I'd never heard of them. And I read them, and I thought, wow, I never, and I thought American Spectator was funny. So I thought, wow, there are actually some funny people. P.J. O'Rourke wrote for him, Tom Wolfe. And that's when I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so that kind of pushed me out. But I still would say that it probably wasn't until I got out of school. Well, no, it was senior year, because I got an internship at the American Spectator right after I graduated. So I was probably as intensely conservative as people were intensely liberal at Berkeley. Because, when you get into something at the start, that's your team. And I think that was, I was team conservative. And it's much easier to be that way than to look at the nuance of politics, just to be on that side. And
so you reacted against the prevailing political climate at Berkeley because there were things about it you didn't like.
Yeah, and actually, I would argue that I was probably wrong on some of the issues, but I was just the intensity of the politic, the stuff that was going on, was what bothered me, and I just had never seen that before, except in movies or something. But some of the issues I probably would have agreed with, but I just didn't see it. I just saw the crowd, and the crowd made me nervous.
Okay. I mean, it was at Berkeley, I would think conservatives were kind of a besieged minority. I mean, was it the groupthink aspect of it? Like, you have to agree with us or be ostracized, or what?
Absolutely. That was it. It was just the feeling that it wasn't about dialogue. And you see it, I think you see it even now today more than ever, that dialogue it's obedience. We don't want to have a dialogue. We just want you to obey, and we don't care. That's when I first saw it. A political movement was up close, was like kind of a tribal thing. But I also see it. I see it everywhere. It's not just there, Mm-hmm. So I've learned that I try to steer clear of ideology, and when I can smell it on me, I try to take a shower. Okay, well, now there are people who would watch some of your monologues on the Five, which, by the way, are collected in this recently published book, the Gutfeld Monologues, who might suggest that there are traces of ideology in some of the things you say. I might be able to point to examples from this very book. You would, and it would. But the thing is, I admit to that. I think I admit in that book a number of times where the stuff I said about Bernie Sanders, I felt was probably ideologically based and at times wrong. And because Sanders is an easy stereotype for the right? So the right can you can call him a hippie. He's never worked a day in his life. He looks like a mad professor. But the fact is, those are easy stereotypes, and you overlook the fact that he was actually talking about some real issues. But for me, I would call it lazy. And I think that there are other examples. So at what point, how did the issue of terrorism become a big part of your ideology? And you can say whatever you want. I won't force you to think about the guy at Rodale Press or anything, okay? I know what you're talking about. So I think it was in the 90s. I was at Rodale, so communism was dead, and I was talking to Dennis Boyles about what could go wrong, because now it's capitalism is one, the free markets, everything. And he said something about how he was concerned over radical religious ideologies, which I did not really pay attention to. And he had said that, and that, lo and behold, was probably something I should have heard better. But he was the first person ever to mention that to me. I would say that I probably ignored I didn't pay attention to it even after I would say the first World Trade Center attack, which I guess was 92, 93. It didn't really register. And then, of course, I was here in Midtown when the 9/11 occurred. And I think after that, all of a sudden you had a ramped up immediate education about Al-Qaeda, radical Islam, and all of that stuff. And I think that obviously had an impact on me and a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to save the part of the conversation where I convert you to my way of thinking on this until a little later,
Because, like, why
Yes.
would people stay tuned if it's already happened? I mean, that's the climax of the conversation.
Exactly. Okay, fair enough.
And what we'll do is move a little more briskly through your ideological evolution. So one thing you note, like, early on in the book is, like, you kind of got Trump wrong. Now, this has to do maybe with what kind of does this have to do with the specific nature of your conservative ideology, or just the fact that, like a lot of us, you looked at him and initially dismissed him as a total clown, or what?
A number of factors. I had met him before, and I found him very pleasant when I met him. I felt that I use this phrase in the book. It's like a 4-hour drive to a half an hour at the beach. There's a lot, like, if you support him, you have to do a lot of work. And I'm going, why would I bother with this when you have all these other able contenders, including some on the Democratic side? I like Jim Webb a lot, but but there were like 3 or 4 other choices, more than that on that. So why do I have to put in all this work? Why do I have to Trump-splain everything he does? I don't need it. And there were things he did that would just, like, why is he doing this? Why is he making us look like jerks? Blah, blah, blah. Plus, there were big Trump fans that were driving me crazy. So I think that had an input on me. Personally, when you go on Twitter, I had an actual fan of mine burn my book because of my criticism. I know it was like, how did this happen? But then
you're defining fan in an unusual way.
Exactly.
For me, they just moved into the non-fan category when they started reading my books, but
it was interesting. It was that also, and I mentioned this in the book, the strange new respect I was getting from people that normally didn't like me because I was highly critical of Trump. And when you're ever highly critical of somebody on your side, you do get these strange new respects from people, and you can pretend like it doesn't matter, but it kind of does. You kind of like that. It's like it makes you feel like you're unique. So I had the people that were annoying me, that were pro-Trump, and the people that were anti-Trump that were being nice to me. And I was also exhausted by the constant, like, what is this guy going to do next? And then after that, he wins the nomination and wins. I had to erase that chalkboard and say, okay, now it's about, how can I live and survive without being emotionally exhausted every day? So I had to divorce myself from emotion. I had to, focus on deeds and just accept the fact that you can't change his words. He's not going to change. This is who he is for 70 years. This is how he talks. I always say he's a real estate tycoon from Queens. That's who he is, and you can't change it. Mm-hmm. That makes it, I don't know if it makes it easier, but it helps me focus on what I can write about rather than always being like, here he goes again.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how attentive you are to the kind of internal psychological dynamics of your experience. I mean, not everyone, I think, would recognize that you were getting these social cues, because that can happen at a very subtle, unconscious level, and you're like getting reinforcement from one tribe and not from another. Because I think that's going on big time right now, and you do feel it. It's like and it's tempting to play to it and to try to maximize the number of retweets and everything, but that can cloud your thinking.
Yeah, the Twitter especially is it is kind of like a recognition video game or something. It's I would, during the campaigns, I would be especially angry at Trump and get in these massive fights with coworkers on live television, and you could see immediately the response from people who normally think you're a fascist, who now think, oh, this guy's okay. And that's it became almost like, but it's like a video. Twitter is like a video game for recognition in all things. It's like, did I get 100 retweets? Did I get 20? It is that dopamine thing again, I think. And it's like all of a sudden you get on there and there's like, how did this happen? I got 1,000 retweets. I must have done something right. And then you start looking for it. Can I repeat? Can I replicate it? And I don't think it's very healthy.
Yeah, and it's like, if you want to maximize, your followership, you got to pick one tribe or the other. I mean, there's not that much support in the middle. I mean, it's interesting to watch people like, Jennifer Rubin, this conservative writes for the Washington Post. Like, I think initially she started out as a conservative anti-Trumper, but if you look at what she's doing, she's just decided it seems like she's just going full on liberal. She's like, I think she's on the anti-Kavanaugh train and it's like,
you can't go back. I think that door, like she went into that room and the door shut, and maybe she shut it or it was shut. But I can't remember the last time I heard anything from her that was considered conservative. Yep. Every tweet could have been written by. But it's so funny because so many sides have changed that it's hard to keep up. Like Glenn Greenwald is on Fox News.
Yeah.
I mean, he comes on Fox like that to me. I remember when I was writing for the Huffington Post and he was there, and how much we were polar opposites. Mm-hmm. But now, how has this happened?
But see, I think Glenn, that's a little different. I see fundamental ideological consistency of a kind of a rare kind in him. He has always. There are just a number of themes that I think that he's kind of staying true to. I mean, he's very suspicious of America's national security state, and he recognizes that the national security establishment, in turning against Trump, has kind of amped up tension with Russia. And, he's, as a lefty, he's not like some ardent Cold Warrior. Right. And I think in a lot of ways, and he's also kind of, he's anti-McCarthyism, and there is a lot of casual throwing around of the word treason and, and so on. I honestly think, I don't think it's the same dynamic as kind of a Jennifer Rubin. I could be wrong. Right. But do you think you're right? There's all kinds of strange bedfellows out there.
Look at there are two other examples. I can't think. The one obviously is Dershowitz. Has become like somebody that I grew up as a guy that was yelled at on Crossfire by the conservative. He'd come on and and the other guy whose name I can't remember. He's married to the woman from The Nation. When I was growing up, he was
Steve Cohen.
Yes, Steve. What's his Cohen?
Cohen. I used to play basketball with him.
See, small world. All you elites.
We used to conspire to subordinate the interests of real Americans to the imperative of globalism and the United Nations. In fact, as I recall, we actually worked with some blueprints of black helicopters during timeouts.
But now, so I grew up thinking that guy was a commie, pinko, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like what? So what? I think what you're saying is that I've changed and they haven't.
You mean you've changed and they haven't, or
yeah?
Well, it's a good question. How much you tell me, how much have you changed? I mean, so going into 2016, you are a libertarian so on social issues, you're not all that far right. I guess you're a free market guy. You don't like a lot of regulation and government intervention. And then you're very concerned about terrorism. And that's kind of it, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I'm pro legalization of, I guess, just about anything. I mean, like drug wise, because I don't see the value in the drug war. Even though I can see on the streets consequences, but I don't. That's because I can see them. I can't see the consequences of the incarceration, but I can see people on the street because of the availability of pot. But I mean, there were drunks back when I was a kid. So I'm trying to look at it as like, okay, we were okay with drunks. They were comical. So we have to allow this to go through that cycle of being a novelty and then just kind of like boring. Yeah. Once drugs become boring, we have to allow it to become boring, I think. But I would say I'm a libertarian on that. Libertarians would not take me into their wing, though, because of my national security beliefs. I always say that freedom and security are siblings, or let's say spouses. Right. They have to one accentuates the other. They don't believe that. They believe that they're pitted against each other. That every time you move a little bit in security, you're taking something for freedom. And then they always tweet that Benjamin Franklin line at you, which is taken out of context. I figured out after reading a book by Benjamin.
What is the quote? What is the quote?
The quote about you sacrifice, something about if you chase security, you sacrifice. You will. And I'm paraphrasing, but if you chase security at the expense of freedom, you will have neither. Yeah. Right? Is that kind of like what it is?
Okay. That sounds right. I mean, I have a whole theory about that I won't bore you with. In a way, yeah. I mean, maybe we should segue into my transforming your ideology before everyone's very eyes. By talking about radicalism. I mean, I'm heading into this obliquely. I have a theory that I do think there's something of a trade-off between security and liberty, if only in the obvious sense that, look, if you wanted to give the government greatly enhanced surveillance powers and the ability to use my webcam to spy on me, if you just wanted to give them infinite powers, they could probably make us a little safer. I mean, there is at least some trade-off there. My own pet theory is that the way to get around the trade-off, the way to have both your security and your liberty is to, now wait for this, we're getting to the part where you start singing Kumbaya. We're not there yet. Is to reduce the amount of hatred in the world. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean, and this is something I've kind of harped on in the past, but by that I mean the modern technological environment makes it easy for a relatively small number of people with a shared hatred to do real damage. And because the information technologies allow them to coordinate, get together, get in touch with one another, realize that they share this hatred of some other group. And then increasingly there will be technologies that aren't even here yet, like biological weapons, that would make it even easier than it is now for them to deploy terror or whatever else. So, my theory is, if you reduce, the number of people who have an intense hatred of another group, that's the way to have your cake and eat it too on the security liberty front. In theory, it makes sense, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, but you touched. I was with you all the way, including the introduction of bioagents. I talk about it, and I get a lot of this. There's a book called "The Future of Violence," which was by Wittes and Danielle Bloom.
Don't know.
Oh God, it fried my brain. It scared the crap out of me. And they talk about it. I think in the first chapter, marrying bioagents to a drone, and how simple it could. One
That's
person.
What I mean.
Yeah, it's good. But I'm a pessimist, I guess, about the reduction of hatred, because although violence has gone down, the hatred has intensified. And I even see hatred intensifying like this among Americans who aren't part of religious sects. That I would, to your point, I'm not so much worried about radical Islam as I am about what's happening between us as a country. That is actually the threat to me that is happening, where we are trying to reduce, we're saying that dialogue is no longer important. Then that removes a step between your emotional urges and violence. That's it's what we talked about with the tribalism. It feels like there are only two choices now. And maybe there's just more of that than there is right now of ISIS. And that's why I feel like there's a shift.
Yeah. But I think those two are to some extent a product of the same thing. I mean, information technology just can be tribalizing. It's it's like when Obama ordered this drone strike on that guy. What was his name? Al-Awlaki. He was the guy. He was an American citizen, and I objected. Glenn Greenwald objected too, by the way, because he was an American citizen. He was executed without due process. And everybody, and people are thinking in an old-fashioned way, well, that's the end of him. He's, if anything, been more influential because there's all these YouTube videos. And YouTube, the algorithm of YouTube, I mean, I assume YouTube is trying to police them and so on, but there are these videos of him that go globally, and information technologies make it easy for all the people who would like to see them.
Right.
So the tribes, they can be very narrow, but still very strong, and they can go global. So I think that's part of the problem. That's not the main thing that's going to convert you within, what do we have, 20 minutes? It's going to convert you to my way of thinking within 20 minutes. But I think it's important to understand that some of this is really technologically embedded.
Right. And so instead of these like religious crusades, because you can't kill everybody anymore because the weaponry.
Amen.
Maybe the religious crusades are technological. You try to convince us, try to convert us on bandwidth. Maybe that's the like. Okay, you want us to join your religious sect. Don't stop killing everybody and start persuading us with videos. Maybe, I don't know, that's how it works. I don't know. But I don't know if you can convince people to give up their...
Okay, I'm going to start. So, get ready.
Yes.
I want you to pause and enjoy this moment when you're still right of center. Because it's not going to last, Greg. We are a few minutes away.
This is exciting.
From our city together.
It's like I'm boarding Space Mountain, and I just know that it's going to be just a new adventure.
Big moment.
Yeah.
Say goodbye to those friends at Fox. So here's the thing: is like, I think I quoted this already. You talked about in the book about Obama's weird aloofness over radical Islam. That the failure of like liberals, especially, to see that Islamic terrorism is an actual thing, and if you can't name it, you're sunk. So there was a lot of emphasis from Trump, certainly, on the labeling of the problem. Now you understand, right? You get what kind of at least is the official rationale. There's a couple of rationales, but the reason people on the left say we want to be careful about the terminology and careful about labeling it Islamic.
I kind of do. I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it. The rationale, I suppose, is not to give them more power than they actually have. So by constantly bringing up radical Islam, you're actually creating a larger force. I just don't see the evidence that not naming them has reduced their strength.
Yeah,
I think bombing terrorists is better than not saying radical Islam.
I suppose you could do both, but far be it from me to.
Well, Obama did.
So anyway, I think there's two rationale. I think first of all, yeah, you're right. The thinking is, wait, if the terrorist recruiters want to convince them that it's part of their obligation as Muslims to support the terrorism, A, and B, the terrorists want to convince them that America is at war with Islam, then maybe it's not an optimal rhetorical strategy for Americans to go around saying the problem is, quote, Islamic terror, or worse still, we are at war with Islam, as some on the right have said. And so that's that argument. But I think there's kind of in my mind, a deeper thing, which is that it leads to a misdiagnosis of the problem. It is, if you think, and I got into this kind of in some depth in my book, The Evolution of God, where I talked about scriptural determinism, the idea that that the original kind of source, the prime mover of what you're calling Islamic terrorism is kind of in the scripture, in the religious belief. It's just in Islam. They just do stuff like this. And the alternative view, of course, is that all religions have belligerent passages in their scripture, right, lovey-dovey passages, and though there may be some differences over time in the tendency to emphasize one over the other, there in different religions, they're not all that pronounced. So the thing to pay attention to is like what circumstances lead them to emphasize the belligerence, right? So this is just a view of the problem as not being fundamentally Islamic. And
right.
And one reason people like me on the left want to emphasize this is we want to say, look, if we had not funneled arms into Afghanistan, going back to Jimmy Carter, I'm not blaming Ronald Reagan for this, but funneled arms into Afghanistan, invaded Iraq, gone for regime change in Libya, funneled arms into Syria more recently, and so on. If we hadn't, and I mean, if you want to talk about Iran, if we hadn't supported a coup in 1953 that deposed the democratic regime and so on, if you take all that off the table, the problem we contend, and take other things off the table, would be the problem of terrorism would be much less pronounced. That's the argument. It could be wrong, but that's one of the reasons the labeling matters. As a, we just think it's a poor guide to diagnosis of the problem. Thinking of the problem as fundamentally Islamic.
Mm-hmm. I think, I just try to figure out why, what did the United States deserve on 9/11? Was that because of, do you believe that was because of us going to some place, or maybe part of it, but I think the other part has to do with, this is a symbol of a religious enemy. I mean, isn't that part of it, or could it be?
You mean, what is the symbol of a religious enemy?
The World Trade Center, or just an attack on America, wasn't it?
I
agree with you, though, that it's the religions have to go. All religions have this, but religions do go through a makeover, and they learn to police their own belligerent factions. And this is also true in political parties. Every political party has an extreme element. And Catholicism, remember Obama made that at the prayer breakfast, talked about the Crusades, and people like me went after him about it. He was making a point, probably not at the best time, but he was making a point, well, what about Catholics or Christianity? So there are religions that go through that makeover, and it's the makeover that we're hoping for happens. But I wonder if the makeover is being kept, is being prevented by leaders who wish to have the climate remain the same. The circumstances are the same, so you have angry young men. So you have angry young men who are willing to die for an idea. Does that make any sense?
No, look, first of all, I would never say we deserved 9/11, and I would encourage people to not think that whenever I say, well, there's something we could have done differently that would have reduced the chances of 9/11, I'm not saying we deserved it.
That's how I would often hear it. It's like
this is a very human thing. I think this is a big problem with the way people think about things, is there's just a natural tendency to think that if you can explain why someone did some bad thing, they are absolved from blame. We all think that way, but I think it gets in the way of clear analysis. What I'd say is, first of all, as for 9/11, well, if you, again, this is not to absolve Osama bin Laden, just in terms of explaining why he did what he did. Well, where did he start getting into radical versions of Islam? In Afghanistan, which was a conflict we essentially created. If you recall, the Soviets, considered Afghanistan, they thought it should be a client state. They went in, they took it over, which is bad. It's not good. But as it happens, our reaction, which was to funnel arms in and encourage people to fight the Soviets in the name of Islam. That was like our plan. That created a kind of a cauldron from which Osama bin Laden emerged. Now, separate from that, he had grievances like, he came back from there and he saw, I think, troops in Saudi Arabia, American troops in Saudi Arabia. And then there were whole other like I think it was, one of the guys, what's his name? One of the main planners of 9/11. His big grievance was Israel-Palestine. Oh, by the way, good segue. What kind of illustrates my point is, some people say, well, Israel-Palestine, Richard Dawkins has said, if it weren't for religion, there would be no Israel-Palestine conflict. Actually, I think that's just, wrong. The Zionism, to begin with, was not a particularly religious thing. And on the other side, if you look at what I would say was the first only act that I know of Palestinian terrorism on American soil, Sirhan, right? When he assassinated Robert Kennedy, and he did it in the name of the Palestinians explicitly. He was a Christian. So for him, that was at that point, it was a national issue. It was two groups arguing over land. And now that has had since most Palestinians are Muslims and for various other reasons, the conflict has had a more religious cast on their side. Anyway, I think you get the basic argument, which I won't push any further. It's just that, and maybe this brings us back to Trump, because you might have thought during the election he was going to his foreign policy would be more to my approval because he seemed very anti-interventionist. And I'm saying various kinds of interventions ranging from invasions to funneling arms. I mean, if we hadn't invaded Iraq, there probably would be no ISIS. I'm saying that those are contributing factors. They're not the only ones. And you're right that foreign leaders like in Saudi Arabia have done their share to foment radicalism. But the reason the labeling matters to some on the left is one reason is they worry that it impedes a clear diagnosis of the problem. I've talked enough. I will now pause for you to tell me that I'm right. You now see the light. Okay.
Regarding the labeling, what I always saw that as misplaced priorities. It was like I would get a little bit irked when you're talking about not you, but when I'm talking when in a discussion about terrorism and about Americans being killed, that people were more concerned about language, and that's a very I would say a very liberal thing. I mean, terminology is really important, and you see that on the fringes as well. I mean, with the pronouns craze going on and things like that. It's always about language, about workplace violence in Fort Hood, and so those things they pile up, and you go like, wow, it's like they care more about how things are stated than how things actually happened. That drives me crazy. So I would say that could be, to a point, a flaw on my part. Maybe I'm not thinking about it deep enough to understand that people are trying to explain, but that the labeling is important. But I think perhaps waiting on the debate over labeling is probably good. You don't immediately when something awful happens, you don't go, wait a second. Also the worrying about the backlash as the attack happens is another part of that piece that kind of drives me crazy. So there's that. The thing you brought up, Trump. I mean, I think Trump was against the Iraq War, even though on Howard Stern he said, I guess it's okay. But he did it in that kind of way of like, I want to talk about this. Let's talk about Miss Universe. So I think he has been. I think he is he ain't no neocon, right? He's not a neocon.
We didn't think so. I think he has to some extent been captured by the neocon establishment and by Sheldon Adelson's contributions and so on. But we didn't think so. We didn't think he'd be leaving troops in Syria forever, which is starting to look like he'll do. No.
Yeah. That's a problem. The one thing, though, on the other side, I like what he did with North Korea. And I know that it's like people can look at it comically, but I do think that there's something happening, like forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back with this thing. And it could end up being a total wash, a complete wash, and we were taken for a ride. But I do find it kind of like, who would have thought he would have taken that risk? It's the we'll see what happens philosophy of a Queen's contractor. See what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm not all up in arms about his conduct in North Korea. I mean, the jury's out. It's like, fine. And you're right. That was not a neocon thing to do. I mean, maybe the initial kind of belligerence was, but the subsequent attempt at rapprochement wasn't. So, I know you got to go before too long, because if you don't get your exercise this morning, you'll lose your temper on the 5 or something. Is that routine? You're going to go to the gym?
Yeah, what I do is I write all my notes, which are like this, and I write them all on the stair climber. So I stand for an hour at the gym with a clipboard, and I write my notes per segment it takes me like an hour, and I find it's the best way to exercise, because you don't think about the exercising, and it's the best way to work. Yeah. Because you don't think as much about the work. So you're actually taking pressure off 2 things, and it makes it. I write a lot faster when I'm on.
People don't walk up and go, "Aren't you Greg Gutfeld?" while you're trying to work.
I think that's happened twice in the 5 years that I've been at this gym. People where I work out, if they don't watch Fox News, they don't know me, and if they do know me, it's they're above saying hello.
They're not above it. You're above it. They are reverential.
Yes, or else they're more famous than I am.
Hard to imagine.
I know it's hard to believe that that's possible, but once in a while, I saw Kanye West in my gym. That was once.
Well, you and him are converging ideologically. You both, neither of you was pro-Trump before the election. Both of you are now, right?
Yeah. And he's coming at it as a CEO. He's looking at it, goes, you got to be a boss. His way of looking at it is you got to be a boss. Sometimes the boss just has to talk in a certain way, and the certain way isn't always like nice. Mm-hmm. It's like, you got to get this done. That is Kanye West. When he looks at Trump, it's like he's a guy who's trying to get something done, so he just says, do it. And I think that was the last time I read Kanye West's interpretation of Trump was something. Oh, it was a great interview he did with a Chicago radio station, and he was explaining why he understands the mentality, and I thought it was pretty refreshing.
Okay, so here's my strategy for getting you to stay a little longer than you said you could stay. I think we should talk more about your book.
I can. How about how you want to say 15 minutes?
Yeah. Oh, totally. If you can give me 15, but I will feel guilty if I tune into the 5 tonight and you just totally lose it because your Stairmaster time was cut short by 7 minutes.
Well, the good news is my monologue from yesterday was bumped, so that's already written. It's on Michael Moore's movie.
Okay, then we'll make it 2 hours. What you said is interesting because this hadn't quite occurred to me that the reaction against the kind of leftish emphasis on how we label the terrorism problem is grounded partly in a real frustration with the leftish emphasis on labeling generally, particularly in the realm of identity politics.
Right.
Because I will say in looking at your book, one thing that occurred to me is Democrats, even though you, and let's pause and say, a good thing about the book is you go back. It's not just a collection. See all these thought bubbles things here that are, injected into pretty much every page. Those are your second thoughts, your mea culpas. I got this wrong. You're adding additional jokes onto the existing jokes.
Right.
A lot of jokes in here.
Yeah.
And so on. But so anyway, you do admit where you got things wrong, and you admit you didn't entirely see Trump coming. You certainly didn't support him during the primaries, but there are things you got right that liberals would have been well advised to pay attention to. And one of them was identity politics. I don't mean, I'm not arguing the issue one way or the other, but you conveyed before the election that this was a huge issue for conservatives. This was a huge issue driving politics on the right. And I think most liberals only realize in retrospect that was how big an issue it is on the right.
Well, I think it was a legitimate concern because you're watching the balkanization. Everybody's now, in order to stress their individuality, is actually is clinging to separate groups and pitting groups against each other, whether it's genders or orientations or race. And so what you were losing is the idea of what is it to be an American. And I think Trump, I've said this before, he watches Fox, and I think he got that, he understood it, that at the end of the day, which I hate saying, people just want to say, hey, look, why can't we all just be friends? Why can't we just why can't we all just be Americans? I have a feeling that that's probably, I'm pessimistic that I don't know if we'll ever get back to that place where we can all just say, hey, we're just Americans. I don't know who's going to be able to do that because we've become everybody's in their different compartments. The only way that it could actually change is if the compartments get so small that they become like little individuals, and then we're just back to being individuals again. Because if you look at the genders, there's the gender pronouns or the sexual orientation. Some of them are comical in the names, and there's so many of them that maybe everybody becomes their own orientation. Maybe that's the answer. I'm a Greg Gutfeld, Yeah. Yeah, well, I know in your book you cast the identity politics issue as kind of identification with a group, which is left-wing identity politics, versus rugged individualism that makes us all Americans. Of course, the view on the left is that there is a version of identity politics on the right. It's and not just like white nationalism in the per se, but a sense among people who aren't like
bigots and so on, but who supported Trump and did so partly because they felt it had to do with an ethnic consciousness. In other words, like they look at affirmative action or whatever and go like, wait a second, this isn't working for my ethnicity. So there is the view that there were various gradations of identity politics on the right.
I think, Juan Williams and I fight about this a lot on the show, and I'm careful not to just completely dismiss the idea of identity politics on the right. I do think it's a reaction to identity politics on the left. Yeah. It's almost like the same argument that you used just 10, 15 minutes ago on Islamic terror. It's like, so yeah, you know what? There probably is identity politics on the right, but it's a reaction to all of this stuff that we can't even keep track of anymore. Like, when I go to work, what do I worry about? I don't know. I mean, I'm not talking about my work, but in general, what are the rules? Why are there special cases here and not here? I think that's like maybe that's the identity politics reaction to identity politics, which is why it sucks. Yeah. The whole thing sucks.
Yeah, the whole thing does suck. We can agree on that. I mean, I do think at least some of right-wing identity politics is a reaction against left-wing identity politics. I think that's kind of hard to deny. One thing you do in the book is you note that Bill Clinton was ahead of the curve. You've got a quote where Bill Clinton is warning against identity politics early on. Yeah, no, it's one of the plainest, most succinct warnings you could have, and but I guess they didn't really listen. They didn't listen to him, and maybe if they had, I mean, Hillary towards the end, I mean, she made it about, well, not towards the end, but in the middle to the end, made it about gender, and so if you didn't vote for her, you were probably a sexist. I would say that was kind of the message. She did play the gender card heavily, and I mean, I'm among the critics. I certainly voted for her, but I mean, I'm among the critics of the way she conducted the campaign. And partly it's like, Trump's campaign. One thing I hated about it was largely a campaign of fear. These immigrants are, rapists or criminals. It was at least the subtext, if not the text. Islam, there are terrorists at your doorstep and so on. But Hillary's campaign was a campaign of fear, not totally without foundation, maybe, because I consider Trump kind of scary, but there was so much emphasis on like, look how horrible my opponent is, and just not all that much in the way of positive vibes. So this is where I get to quote Scott Adams, that fear is one of the most persuasive elements in life. And if you think about it, it's like Hillary caught on when she referred to Trump as dark. It's kind of like this dark thing. It was a specific speech, I think, about the alt-right, maybe. Yeah. And that was, and also, I mean, fear sells. Yeah, it does. And sometimes fear is right. Sometimes it's right, but it's a dangerous, you're playing with fire precisely because humans aren't that good at calibrating their fear wisely, especially in the modern world where, it's in my living room. Well, yeah, it's in your living room, but it actually happened like 3,000 miles away. So, but we're not, the brain didn't evolve to necessarily make those distinctions so clearly. So I think you got to be careful because there is this dark side which you can unleash. Well, an example of this is, being on Broadway and 20th, looking at your iPhone, looking at the latest ISIS video and getting hit by a bus because the technology has distracted you. Right. And seeing a lot of that nowadays and not to downplay the ISIS threat, but we overlook some of the things that are probably dangerous right now to us, and that is I think distraction is a danger, but it's a really boring danger. Yeah. It's very boring. You can't get people scared about distracted driving until it happens to a member of your family. So I think I saw a statistic that distracted driving now has overtaken drunk driving as a cause of homicides. I mean, vehicular death. Right. I wish I could remember what book I saw that in, but it was a recent book. And I mean, I think
it was about self-driving cars, and why self-driving cars, we need to have them is because of the distraction.
Someday they will be better than me as actually they may already be better than me as drivers. But I think one good development is people are realizing how social media are like messing with their heads, and they're starting to realize they can get a little too immersed in fears and so on. So
I think it's I don't know how to get that genie back in the bottle, but it's like going to bed and doing that stupid thing of like, just before it's 11 o'clock and you just go on Twitter and then you're screwed for 2 hours because you just knowingly injected yourself with some negative energy and then people always say, hey, I'm going off Twitter for a month and I feel great, but they go back on it. It's like, I took a cleanse, and then they come back people go on vacation. I've done this. I go on vacation with my wife and would swear I'm not going to, but you'll see me after a couple of glasses of wine. I'll be tweeting a picture of a chicken on a beach. And why am I doing that? I don't know why I'm doing that. And so it's a dopamine thing. It has to be, I think.
Two great things about what you just said is that it sets up my two final questions because I know the Stairmaster waits. But one is, well, first of all, the plug. I published something called the Mindful Resistance newsletter, which you can sign up for, mindfulresistance.net, which is about my view that the so-called resistance, I'm certainly anti-Trump, but that it's not always being conducted wisely. People are getting a little too wrapped up in social media and so on. But that in turn leads, the word mindful leads to this question. Are you still meditating, Greg? Yes, I am. It is, for some reason, harder than it's been, but I read up on this whenever that you go through these peaks and valleys with meditation where, but I still try, and then oftentimes I'll just fall asleep instead, I still do it. I still try to do it almost every day. Yeah. And I'll in like 15, 20 minutes, and I haven't had the intensity of that I did. I could say 2 years ago, I was like, it was very intense. And then not 2 years, maybe it was last year. No, it was, last year it was great. But now I feel like I've hit some kind of weird place. You had that thing, you hit your head and that messed with your meditation, right? You're over that though, right? Yeah, that was in February. So I assumed, so this gets me to an interesting point. You know what helps my meditation? A little bit of ZQL. What? I don't know why. But what is it? What is that word? It's an experiment. Wait, I lost it. It's NyQuil. It's NyQuil without the cold medication. It's just a sleep inducer? Yes. And I think it gets me to a place where I don't know what it is, but it gets me to a less anxious place that I couldn't, like, if I can't get there with meditation, it's like almost like a steroid for an athlete. It gets me a little bit to that place. And then I can relax, and it helps. It might be. It's probably no different than drinking a glass of wine. I think that's what it's probably. I have not yet found the sleep aid that will not give me a hangover the next day. So ZQL does give you a grogginess. Yeah. And, but I take a gulp. I don't use. You don't actually inject it. No, I don't. Good. That's good. If it stops working, I will think about that. But I don't like the prescription stuff because I believe it is linked to bizarre behavior. I know that I've eaten stuff that I don't remember eating when I used to take Ambien, and I'd wake up in the morning and there would be like a half a loaf of bread and peanut butter. And when did I do that? That's one of the signs that you should switch to ZQL when you start not remembering feasts. So, but I'm still. I know you got to go. In short, yes, I am meditating. And you know what I would say? even liberals who will be deeply annoyed by this, which is one plausible reaction to certain parts of it, should read it just on like kind of know your enemy grounds. And of course, the other thing is I discourage thinking of you as the enemy because we are trying to overcome this tribal thing. But, and of course, conservatives already know they should read it. They already are. They're already giving you 5-star reviews. So anyway, now is the part where we sing Kumbaya, and I'm going to ask you to go first, Greg.
What are the words again?
Okay, so next time. So we'll save that for next time. But thanks for taking the time. Good luck at the gym. Enjoy the 5. And
now it's your turn to come on to my podcast. I want to talk about...
I'm totally available.
Yeah, definitely, because there's some things I want to talk to you about. Since you have great guests on your show, that won't do mine.
I'll get them on. Like who?
So I'm going to use you. Like, I want to talk about sleep, and I want to talk about consciousness. And the guests that you have, just go Fox News. Not they're busy. So
I'll put in a good word for you. We will talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. So thanks a lot. All right.
Thanks, Bob. See you soon. Bye-bye.